Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Maria. And
go on.
Thanks, Maria, and thanks, Sandy. Nice to see you all. And it's actually really nice to have a brief distraction from the horrors of events in Europe in 2022. I have to say, I mean, it's just ghastly. But I'm off to a vigil for Ukraine shortly after this, and I'm sure many of us are doing similar things in our own constituencies over the weekend. But you know, politics has to go on, and this is a really important issue for all of us. I'm always normally I would be to share a platform with John as a fellow PLP member, because it illustrates the non-factionalism of electoral reform as an issue, and how this is an issue that unites all wings of the party and none. So I think that's a really good signal that you've sent out by having the two of us at your AGM today. And I think we've got a lot to celebrate. You know, a lot of hard work went on last year to get those resolutions through CLPs, to get them up to conference, a record number of resolutions on electoral reform, a fantastic result in the constituency ballot vote, 80%, but unfortunately we're not quite there with the unions. But since conference, of course, there have been some quite encouraging signs that could change by conference this year. And there's an awful lot of hard work that's going on in Unite, in Unison, and one or two of the other unions. And the very real prospect that if we bring this issue back to conference this year, that we could well win. And that would be a hugely significant moment for the campaign for electoral reform, not just within the Labour Party, but across politics in the United Kingdom as a whole. We also have a record number of MP supporters, and some of our leading supporters were recently given big jobs by Kieran and reshuffle. Some of the talent of the next generation coming through, which I think is also very encouraging. People like Wes Streeting, who's always been a very strong supporter of electoral reform. And I think the signs of the sort of sensible cooperation that's been going on between us and the Lib Dems is also a really encouraging sign, not just in terms of the recent by-elections, where we managed to engineer Tory defeats in all three, thanks to a sort of informal non-aggression pact, if you like, but the clear signals that is clearly Keir's intent for the general election too. And one of the reasons I'm very pleased about this is I think that there was a danger that we might have got distracted by a debate about so-called progressive alliance, some kind of formal pact with the Lib Dems and maybe the Greens. That was never really a starter, not least because the Lib Dems weren't going to go along with that. But I also don't think it's particularly productive and doesn't work. Much better to do what looks like they're going to do, which is to do what we did in 97 and 2001, actually, with great effect in terms of maximising the anti-Tory vote and the number of Labour and Lib Dem MPs elected, which is not to focus our resources and efforts in each other's target seats. So I think that's all really, really encouraging. Some of you have asked me in the past about the Brown Commission. I mean, the Brown Commission, John may have more to say about this, but this is steeped in a certain amount of mystery as far as I can make out. But I would say that, given that the main purpose of this is apparently the union, there's a very strong argument to be made by all of us, either individually or as an organisation, that one of the barriers to maintaining the union and unity both within and across the United Kingdom is the perverse impact of first past the post on the geographical spread of political representation. You know, you have this bizarre system whereby for one parliament, I was the only non-Tory MP southwest of Bristol, the only one, and yet fewer than 50% of people in the southwest had voted Tory. And that just creates this incredible political imbalance not just between the different nations of the United Kingdom, but also within nations and within England in particular, which fosters division, leads to the kind of polarization of our politics that has become so toxic for many of us. And so I think if there's a single argument to make to Gordon as to why he should be thinking very seriously about this in the context of his commission, it's that. And also pointing to the success actually that electoral reform has had in Scotland, Wales and in Northern Ireland, despite the huge challenges in Northern Ireland. So I think in summary, we're facing the prospect of a very exciting year. I think it's highly unlikely that there's going to be a general election this year, even if they dump Johnson, which means that we've got another conference to get through before the manifesto drafting process and the policy formation process. So that gives us real opportunity to build on the success we had last year. I know sometimes it can feel a bit wearying to feel we've got to go through the whole thing all over again of galvanizing support at CLP level and getting motions through. But I think, you know, that we really are in one final push territory here, and then it will be over to the leadership and focusing our attention on trying to get them to do the right thing when it comes to drafting the manifesto in the run-up to the next election. So good luck, everyone, and keep up the good work, and hope to see you at a successful conference, if not sooner.
Ben, thank you so much for those very inspiring words. Oh, there is a clappy icon that people could raise if they'd like to do so, but I'm sure we're all feeling it even if we're not doing it. So thank you so much. I hope that you will stick around to answer a few questions. But first of all, let's have John McDonnell, who also needs no introduction from me, speaking for, you know, on really whatever you want to speak about, but PR, hopefully.
Thanks, Maria. As Sandy says, we are incredibly middle-aged and white, aren't we? It's good to see you all, but it's like my life passing in front of me at the moment. I've seen so many familiar faces. And Ben always does this thing about, you know, different sides of the party, elements of the party and all the rest. At the last election, when he went for his selection, I think didn't I do a supportive quote, Ben? I think it was on the basis what a good constituency MP you were, and I thought you were the best person to win the seat as well. And now you're going to be thinking, well, retire. What's that all about? You've got to guarantee the seat is secure before you go, if you are going to definitely go. I think you need to think again. Anyway, it is one of those days. I'm going off straight away. I'm on the Great Ormond Street strikers picket line because of what's happening there. It's a pretty desperate situation for a lot of people who have been on strike now for a long period of time, the women cleaners and security. But on them also, we've got our demonstration for the Ukraine Solidarity Campaign in Downing Street. We've switched it from the Russian embassy to Downing Street so that we can combine with some of the Ukrainian community groups. I was involved in setting up the Ukrainian Solidarity Campaign actually, I think about 8 years ago now, and people forget, but when I was Shadow Chancellor, I brought forward a program 4 years ago about how we tackle the Russian oligarchs and their tax evasion and money laundering and the sanctions we should bring forward then. And a lot of the Tories derided it then, some of you may remember, and attacked us for it, but actually it was the right thing to do then. And I think it would have, helped, maybe if it didn't prevent, maybe deter some of the work that some of the aspects of Putin's rule at the moment. But desperate situation today. I'm trying to convince people that what we need to do now, because I've got Ukrainian constituents, we need to be airlifting people out now and providing them with refuge as soon as they get to Poland and elsewhere. It's so desperately to save lives. Anyway, can I just quickly go through where I think we're at on Ben's point about securing a majority position for electoral reform in the party? Can I just say, I think Boris Johnson is our best asset on this. And I say this, and I'm going to use some language that some of you may not approve of, but actually it's because his regime, I think, is truly shocking. I've described it as neo-fascist. Now, people say, well, that's a strong language, but what does that mean? It means that he has those elements in him and in his regime that actually you can associate with the undermining of democracy, the parliamentary system, the rule of law, his attitude to the courts, etc. And I think it is truly dangerous. And it is at its heart as well corrupt. And I think increasingly people are becoming aware of that. And the legislation he's putting through, well, the police and crime bill, you know, the way in which they're trying to ensure that they outlaw criminalized demonstrations, the targeting of the Roma community, the elections bill, effectively Trump's suppression of votes, tactics, interference with the Electoral Commission, even the Speaker's Committee, trying to fix that as well with party political placemen and women. And in addition to that, obviously the nationality bill, which is causing such anxiety amongst my constituents, the way in which the Home Secretary would be able to render people stateless. So all of that, I think, is demonstrating that our electoral system has provided us with a regime which actually is threatening even some of the rules, the basic democratic rules of our system. And I think that lends the opportunity, therefore, for us to have a wider debate of that electoral reform, both in the party and outside of it. And I think people are waking up to the threat that Johnson is making to that he poses to our whole system. And I actually think we need to draw the links between people's increasing abhorrence of Johnson and his regime with how we've got here. And we've got here, as we argue, because our electoral system has actually really does not relate to the democratic wishes of people as they participate in the last election. Certainly the scale of the votes he's got shouldn't be reflected in an 80-seat majority. And I think even some of it on his own side now are waking up to the fact that we almost have an electoral dictatorship now. And that gives us, I think, the opportunity of driving home the argument even further amongst our own party members and supporters about the need for reform. And actually, I think we need, as a result of Johnson's behaviour, I think it does give us with a sense of urgency about that reform as well, that we can't miss the opportunity as we go into this next election of making this one of the key issues that we campaign for. And then when we go into government, having it as a priority issue for implementation at an early stage in that government, so that actually we've consolidated it in that first year. In terms of the vista of support that we'll discuss today, I think we demonstrated at the last conference and the scale of support amongst the CLPs. And thanks to the work that you've all done, it is enormous. We have an overwhelming majority now amongst the CLPs. And the most important thing for me, I think, is not allow that to slip back. So that does mean some intensive activity amongst the CLPs themselves. I have to say also, we need, if possible, and this might be difficult, but all the different individual groups within the party, I know it can get factional at times, whether it's Labour First or Momentum or whoever. I think what we've got to do, it's almost like the West, and somehow we've got to get them in the same room to have a discussion about this, get them to hang up their guns at the door of the saloon and just sit them down and say, let's have a discussion about this issue and how we can really convince a number of those organisations to mobilise their members for us within the constituency parties to ensure, as I say, our support within the CLPs doesn't fall back, but is actually built as we go into the next conference. I agree with Ben. I don't think there's any prospect of a general election this year. I was working on the basis of spring of next year. I think now, because of, and I might get this completely wrong, but I think the way the economy is deteriorating, I think now the Tories will most probably go long. I think they may not go for spring of next year, but might push it quite late. Now, there's advantages and disadvantages of that for us in terms of electoral prospects, but I still think that can give us and render us a majority, because I don't think the economic circumstances that they're in will clear up quickly. But in addition to that, I think there'll be more divisions on the Tory side, whether Johnson remains or goes, to be honest. So I think we've got to work, and this is the bureaucrat in me, I think we've got to have two plans. One is the plan for consolidating the support this year in case there is an election the spring of next year, but also have a fallback plan of a longer strategy, which takes us into the following year. I think they may hang on as long as possible. So that means not just the work in the CLPs, but the point that Ben made around the trade unions. I actually think it's the most fruitful period that we've got in the trade union movement at the moment. There's a sort of a new generation of trade union leaders. There's a sort of a new unionism taking place. You can see that happening in some of the industrial struggles taking place. But also, I think that no matter what some have said about not getting involved politically and concentrating on the industrial, I actually don't think that's true. I think some are saying that for effect amongst their own members, but none of them are going to take their eye off the political ball within the Labour Party either. So the consolidation that we need to do amongst the bigger unions is important, but then also some of the smaller unions, we need to just, again, make sure we're using them as mobilising forces amongst their members. And again, what we can offer from the parliamentary side with our connections with the individual unions as well is a systematic approach to that, where we union by union see what contacts, political contacts that we've got to deliver that. Final points I want to make is on the policy development approach. Annalise Dodds, who used to be in my Treasury team, who I think is brilliant, as chair of the party, she's now leading the policy development. As you know, the consultations that are taking place, we've got to try and dominate is the wrong word, but we've got to have such a strong presence in all of those consultations, whereby we try and reflect, no matter what they're talking about, we try and reflect that back into a discussion about actually how electoral politics is important to all of it, and therefore the electoral system is absolutely key. Ben mentioned Gordon Brown. I keep in touch with Gordon. There hasn't, this isn't a criticism, there hasn't been an awful lot of movement that I've seen around the commission so far. And I think that's because Gordon's doing exactly the right thing. He's talking to people quietly, building up an understanding of where people are coming from, identifying the agenda that needs to be approached before he does anything too publicly. But again, what we need to do is make sure we keep open all the avenues of discussion with him as that work develops. And it is a minefield, really. It really is, when you about what happens in terms of devolved governments, concept of home rule, etc. But the point that Ben made, I think, is the strongest one. You've got to have some form of electoral system that actually is cohesive and does actually throw up a proper representative UK government alongside a properly representative devolved governments as well. On the wide alliances issue that Ben has raised, we're going to work cross-party, and that's going on, and I think that's increasingly fruitful as well. But there's another area I think we need to explore as well. We need to build up a climate of opinion just generally. During the COVID period, I launched an exercise called Claim the Future, and I brought together lots of policy wonks, policy advisors, researchers, academics, and link them up with campaigns, etc. I think we just need to stand back a little bit and map out all those ideas people, if you like, in their various institutions, think tanks, academic circles, working with journals, etc., and just map out what support we can develop even further amongst that sort of ideas community, because they're the people who actually then can communicate effectively with their own institutions, but can contribute to building up a climate of opinion, which then becomes overwhelming and therefore influential both within the party, but also in the wider political movement as well. And on that basis, I think comprehensively, we could be in a situation in the next 8 months, 12 to 18 months, where I'm afraid it gets a bit Gramsci in this, and I apologize, but where just PR becomes the essential common sense of our politics as we go into that next election. I think that sounds ambitious, but I actually think it's achievable now, which it may not have been only a few years ago. So I'm optimistic. I better shut up at that point. I'm not really.
Well, okay, thank you so much, John. And I can see people are preferring their real hands for clapping rather than their virtual ones, and that's absolutely fine. So I'm going to be taking questions, and I can see there's quite a lot already. Now, because both of our MPs have to go in the not too distant future, I would like the comments that I take now really to be questions to them, and there will be opportunities for people to hold forth independently later on. So the person at the top left of my screen is, why don't I take the comments and questions in groups of 3? So I've got Anne Black, I've got Vicky Seddon, and I've got Robin Layfield. I'll take those 3, and then I will ask first Ben and then John to respond. So Anne.
Okay, thank you. Hello both. 2 questions. I'm debating the Progressive Alliance and related issues with a Compass speaker next Wednesday, and I would like some ammunition, because the party is kind of, CLPs are putting forward rule changes saying they should be able to decide not to stand a candidate and so on. And second one is how we get policy making going, because Annalise Dodds is my local MP, I'm chair of the National Policy Forum, and both of us are finding ourselves unable to get the kind of consultation we need to build momentum with a small m behind this.
Thank you, Anne. So, okay, so there's the one question about the Progressive Alliance. Vicky?
Thank you. Very much agree with what John McDonnell said about the ideas agenda. And can I ask John whether he thinks that needs to go to be not seen as the Labour Party, but part of the wider alliance building initiative? That's the first question. The second question is, in terms of using opportunities that arise, we currently have the election of the regional mayor in South Yorkshire coming up, and the Labour candidate has not yet declared himself in favour of PR, despite my nudging him quite a bit. And so does John think, do our speakers think it would be a good idea to try to use that opportunity to nudge people in support of that position?
Thanks, Vicky. Great questions. Moving on to the third and final of this round, Robin Layfield.
Oh yeah, thanks Ben and John for your insights. That's great. It's good to hear what you got to say. There's been a lot of talk about Russian influence on our politics, and I just wanted to ask, do you think electoral reform is becoming a national security issue?
Okay, thanks very much. So I'm going to ask Ben to respond first to as many of those questions.
And well, good luck in your debate.
You will have to unmute yourself.
Am I unmuted?
You are.
Yeah. Good luck, Anne. Good luck with in your debate with Compass. I mean, I suppose there are a number of arguments I would utilise against the so-called Progressive Alliance. One is that there's very strong evidence that the voters don't like it. They don't like parties having stitch-ups behind closed doors to stand down candidates, and often that can backfire on the parties that make those sort of arrangements. Secondly, there's also an assumption by some on the Liberal left that the second preference for Lib Dem and Green voters is always going to be Labour. Well, many of us can tell them that's not the case. I mean, in Exeter at the last election, the Greens and the Lib Dems had the so-called Progressive Alliance against me. And the result was that virtually the Lib Dems didn't have a candidate. Virtually all those voters voted for me, and a lot of other people were so irritated they also voted for me. So I mean, and also there's no evidence that it works. So but there is evidence that what does work is the kind of informal non-aggression pact that we had in '97 and 2001, combined with a very effective independently run tactical voting campaign. You know, that we know from the results in '97 and 2001 that we got more seats and the Tories got fewer seats because of that. And so, you know, and also the Lib Dems aren't up for this. I mean, if it's only the Greens who are up for it, you know, the first question back is, well, where do we stand down for the Greens? Because they're hardly second anywhere. Yeah, I mean, good luck, but I think the fact that Keir and I can't even remember the name of the leader of the Lib Dems, that's really embarrassing. Anyway, the fact that they've been so clear that it's not, that shows you how high his profile is in Parliament. The fact that they've come out so clearly against it, I get a sense it's kind of going off the boil, this Progressive Alliance thing, to be perfectly honest. So on policy, I mean, I suspect that, you know, the policy process has been slowed up by everything else that's been going on, and that, you know, given the very strong feeling I think now that there's not going to be an election this year, that they feel they've got a bit more time. I may be wrong on that. I'm not privy to these discussions. John may know more. Vicky, on ideas, yes, and you know, I mean, I think that the way to couch our argument now is to use the things that John referred to about the corruption of this government, the venality, the clientism of our politics, and use a fairer voting system as part of an essential package to clean up and modernise our politics. You know, this is something that Keir clearly feels very strongly about. You know, he's expressed himself as being open to electoral reform in the past, but he feels really strongly about the need particularly post-Johnson, to implement, for example, all the recommendations of the Independent Standards on Public Life Committee. But that is a package, along with House of Lords abolition, stroke reform, democratisation, has to stand together. We have to make sure that electoral reform is shoehorned into that, which leads me on to the elected mayors. I mean, the best argument to use with our candidate is that actually the system we've got at the moment for elected mayors really helps us, because we benefit from the 1-2 preference vote. I mean, look, we wouldn't have won the West of England mayor with Dan. We wouldn't have lost the Cambridgeshire mayor if we hadn't got those second preference votes from the Lib Dems and the Greens. So it's in the left's interest to have this kind of system. I know it's not a fully PR system, but it's better than first past the post. So he I assume it may be a she, sorry, forgive me, I'm not sure who the candidate is, but they should be supportive of this in the interest of Labour winning, if not for ethical and moral arguments. Electoral reform as a national security issue. Well, I mean, I'm one of the people, I think I was probably the first MP to raise concerns about Kremlin interference in our democracy after the Clinton Trump election and the referendum. And what's really interesting is a lot of the stuff we were saying now saying back then is now being talked about again. I'm not sure that electoral reform, having a PR system, would make us any less vulnerable or less of a target for hostile foreign states to try to intervene, but they might provide a bit more of an insurance policy that, you know, if they get behind, you know, a party or a cause, if you want to, you know, term Brexit in that way, that at least if you don't have first past the post, they have less possibility of actually delivering a result, which, you know, we have to now live with for the next few years. So I suppose, yes, as an insurance policy, but I think probably trying to argue that it's a national security issue, maybe take it a little bit too far. But I think you have a point. Yeah, I do.
Thanks very much, Ben. So let's move straight over to John for answers and observations on the same questions.
Okay, on the last point, I think there is an issue there. I think the increasingly now people are recognizing our system is open to influences that actually distort the electoral results. The reason I say this, Ben, is because if you look at what happened on Brexit in particular, and if you look at the December 19 election too, there's a whole range of issues there where there were behind the scenes activities, which we now know were appalling, really. And there was a whole range of elements of funding that was coming in that we still haven't really got to the bottom of, which was pumping out information, etc. So I think there's an issue that if we can ride on the back of that analysis of how our system can so readily be distorted, we can argue that actually what PR does at least gives us a safe anchor to prevent some of that and tackle it. So I think it's worth throwing it into the mix. And going backward, just on Vicky's question, you said, should we have the discussion of policy wider or just for the Labour Party? Well, we want to do both. But the thing about interesting, when I was Shadow Chancellor, what attracted people, policy wonks and others towards me, and we had hundreds of different advisors and advisory groups all buzzing away with ideas. What attracted them towards us is the prospect that they could influence policy in going into government. And I think that's why when you do it as the Labour Party and you're saying, well, actually, we're doing this because we're going to implement those policies when we go into government, it makes it more attractive to people to come towards us. I think use the mayoral system arguments all the time, but you know that the Tories are changing the system. You know, they are bringing in the first past the post full stop, and they're withdrawing the minimal sort of reforms that we had. And it just shows you how they're manipulating the electoral system themselves to their own advantage. It is a disgrace, this regime. I call it a regime because that's how it operates. It's appalling under Johnson. But I'm trying to, in all the mayoral and selections, and also actually in some of our local debates with local candidates as well, I've been raising PR as a discussion point because it raised the profile then, and actually you can get some more commitments. And on Anne's point on the Progressive Alliance, I tell you what worries me about all of that is it isn't that people switch their votes and therefore they strengthen the advantage to us. is people often think, I'm not going to vote anyway. If there isn't a Labour candidate, I just won't vote. And that worries me a bit, to be honest. And the other thing, just on the policy stuff, I've been trying to say to Keir and others for quite a period, if you want to learn the lessons of the December the 19 general election, yes, it was dominated by Brexit, but it came 2 years early. And to try and shift the agenda from Brexit, you saw what I was doing, throwing out policy after policy after policy. And people just thought they lacked credibility because there's so much of this. And for new policies, you have to have about a year at least where you announce something, you bed it down, you rebut the arguments, you explain to people what it means to them individually in their community, and then eventually you build up that support. And what I've been saying to our own front bench is be careful, because you could run out of time if you don't start being a bit clearer now. You've got to move beyond the vision thing into some, at least a minimal concrete policy program that people think they're the 5 things we're going to do. If you remember, can you remember John Prescott's pledge card? Actually, that really worked. And I think what we've got to do is try to say to them, sometimes on policies like this, you have to plant a flag. Say, this is what we want to do. What do you think about it? Rather than be general about, well, what would you like us to do? Sometimes you have to say, this is what really we want to do. What do you think about that, and all the rest? And I think on this is one of those issues that you could stimulate quite a significant and constructive debate. It enables you also to test the levels of support for a particular issue, and then you can start adapting it on the basis of some of the comments you get back. Can I say one other thing as well? I know people think I'm off the wall on this one. I do actually agree with citizens' assemblies as well. I think they quite work. I think bringing people together in that way can be a way in which you can resolve issues. Actually, Gordon Brown recommended, and I couldn't convince anyone else about it, Gordon Brown was recommending citizens' assemblies around the Brexit issue. There's a way of bringing people together and at least hammering out maybe compromises in that way. And I think we should try them, definitely.
Thank you, John. Now I'm seeing that there's 2 other people. I know that the MPs have to leave, but do you think you could just stick around for 2 really quick questions and then just answer? So I've got Tim and I've got Alan. So Tim, if you would like to go first, make your questions brief.
Great, thank you everyone, and thanks Ben and John and for what you're doing around Ukraine as well. I felt very angry after party conference. You know, I like many people on this call spent a lot of time speaking at CLPs. I'm a member of the GMB. I spoke to Gary Smith and to Barry Gardner at conference. And I just felt very deflated by it. I mean, my GMB branch kind of even had a motion on PR, which, you know, was supportive of it. So, you know, I think in a way we talk about democracy and how the culture of democracy is so important to this issue, but we have a problem of culture of democracy in our own party. Let's be honest about it. I mean, it was totally undemocratic what happened at party conference, that the majority of the membership were supportive of this, and you know, trade unions, and we talk about old white men, and I'm a white man, but you know, there's an issue of I think there's an issue of a culture of tribalism, which I feel is kind of embedded in our party, of you know, sexism, you know, of you know, I just think that in a way, I guess my question ultimately is, you know, what are we going to do about the trade unions? And you know, I'm considering leaving the GMB. I've been a member for 15+ years, but you know, I was very disappointed in the GMB, and I've said that to them. And I'd love your advice on kind of what do we do with the trade unions, and what do we do about the culture of democracy, or lack of sometimes, in our own party. Over.
Thanks, Tim. Okay, Alan.
It's not a question, it's a point of information. I can't speak for Neil Lawson, but I am involved with Compass. And I think that their position on Progressive Alliance is being misrepresented here. I think at one time, Neil was quite gung-ho for Progressive Alliance, but I think the only stand to win strategy, which the motion that Anne referred to is related to, and which I took through my branch 10 days ago.
Alan, I'm really sorry, can I just stop you here? Because Ben and John, so I would be very happy to take this point of information afterwards, but I know that Ben and John are in a great hurry. So can I just ask for their answers on the previous question, and then I'll take you straight away afterwards?
Sure.
Okay. So do you want to go first on this one, John?
Okay. Look, I understand your frustration, Tim, about what happened within the unions themselves. Don't leave the GMB. It's actually, when you're in that situation, you don't leave, you stick and win the argument. And that's what you'll be able to do, I think, because there's all sorts of debates within the GMB going on. I'm a member of Unison, and we've got tussles within Unison at the moment with a new executive elected, and they were elected on the basis of much more democracy and giving the union back to rank and file members. And again, that's happening right the way across the union movement at the moment, much more. There's a new atmosphere about actually, let's look again at what the role of the union is and how members themselves can have a much greater say. And I think there's a new surge of democracy going through the trade union movement at the moment. And that gives us the opportunity then to actually then put this issue on the agenda. I do think in the trade union movement, despite what happened at conference, in a number of unions, we're at a tipping point. And once we can achieve it in a couple of them, I think that then renders the whole balance at conference in our favor, because we've got such overwhelming support amongst the CLPs. I do think, though, and maybe this is self-criticism too, I do think actually within the unions, a lot of some of the work that's been done has been tremendous. But the more, when I speak at union branches, etc., because this hasn't been an issue that's been widely debated amongst some of the unions, there is a lack of knowledge and information, etc., about what we're about. And I think that's one of the things maybe we need to think about how we communicate directly with trade union members on this particular issue and how we make it relevant for them. So in some ways, that might be part of the work that we've got to focus on as much as possible. One of the best ways we've been using social media for at the moment in the trade union movement now is around mobilizations. And again, some of the social media work that you've done through this organization campaign, I think has proved pretty effective. And it might be that we want to do maybe a longer and more targeted social media campaign directed at the trade unions or even individual trade unions in this coming period to demystify the issue and then mobilize the support itself. But don't leave the GMB. Thanks,
John. Ben.
I agree with that. I mean, I think you're not alone, Tim, in feeling how you felt after the conference, and I think it was damaging to the unions actually among the wider Labour membership, and that's not good for the party as a whole. And but the way to change it is to stay and fight. I mean, that's what you do, and change and fight for change from within. I mean, we could talk about the British trade union movement and the need for change and modernisation probably for the rest of today, but that's what this meeting's about. We've all got our own views on that, but I think something we can all agree on, I hope, is that the relationship is really important, but it does need to be modernised. And I mean, Alan, I know it's important information, but please do email me after this, because I'd be interested to hear what you had to say anyway, but I really do have to go because I'm supposed to be making a speech in a few minutes. So good luck to everyone, and thanks for inviting me, and I'm sorry we've had to truncate this bit a little bit because of John and my diaries, but it's been great, and let's hope this year is the year we finally win.
Well, thank you so much to MPs Ben Bradshaw and John McDonnell. We're sorry to see you go now, but we have so much enjoyed having you. So thank you very much. Just before we move on with the rest of the meeting, I would, just in relation to this point on the trade unions, I would like to say that obviously this is going to be very much a focus of the work of the campaign over the coming year. And in particular, there is a campaign called Politics for the Many, which is very much sort of, which is very much alongside us, I will say. And actually later on in the meeting, we will be hearing about the work that Politics of the Many has been doing. So I'm seeing Alan's hand up, and I will take you now. Just since I first of all read out the apologies, there's two more. There are Benj Eckford and Duncan Enright who sent apologies. So I'm just putting those out now. I have thanked Ben Bradshaw and John McDonnell. I think they've both rushed off now. That was great. Alan, I'll let you say your piece now, and then after that, start thinking about more questions and contributions, and I will take more yellow hands as they appear. Over to you, Alan.
Thanks, Maria. So as I was saying, I think Compass's position is being somewhat misrepresented. I think, and I'm not speaking for Neil, but I am involved with Compass. At one point, Neil, as the driving force, was quite gung-ho for Progressive Alliance, but I think his position has shifted, and I think that the Only Stand to Win strategy, which is the rule change that Anne referred to, in case you don't know what it is a kind of indication of that. And I think it's kind of, I would argue, unobjectionable to argue that within a democratic party, CLP should have the democratic right to decide whether to stand a candidate or not. I took a motion in support of this through our branch, as I said last week, and we'll be taking that to our GM next month. I'm also taking a motion to try and commit our CLP to PR to our GM on Monday. That's all I want to say.
Well, thank you, and good luck with your motion on PR, Alan. Good. So the next, I think for a while at least, I'm going to take the contributions one at a time and see how we go with that. So I've got Sandy Martin, who, as you probably all know, is chair of LCER. Sandy.
Yes, I'm sorry, Maria. I feel a little bit pushing in here, but I do think I need to put it on record. We have discussed whether or not LCER should support or not support Progressive Alliance, and it is a difficult one. But there is a difference between supporting a particular policy position and deciding that it is not integral to our campaign. So we decided that because a lot of members of LCR have different views about a Progressive Alliance, we were not going to take a policy position on it. And that doesn't mean we can't discuss it. Of course we can. And it doesn't mean that, you know, everyone's views are not interesting. Of course they are. But we, I think, quite rightly decided that we wouldn't decide to either oppose it or promote it as an organization, because that way we would actually lose an awful lot of the impetus that we've had from uniting with other organizations. So we are working with Compass through Labour for a New Democracy. We are working with other organizations. We're working with MPs like John and Ben, and we are able to do that because we are not taking a firm position one way or the other on various elements of Progressive Alliance. I thought I'd better say that before anyone started getting hot under the collar about each other.
Thank you, Sandy. Okay, so the next person that I can see is somebody just called Tim, and I'm afraid I don't know your last name, but perhaps you would introduce yourself by your full name so we have it on record. Tim.
Okay, thanks. Yes, I was aware of that. I'm Tim Sylvester. I'm from the Allestree Ward Labour Party in Derby. I kind of agreed very much with a lot of the things that John was saying, and it's one of the things I've been thinking lately, which is that this government is trying very hard to cement its position long term because of the legislation they're proposing with the Electoral Commission and with the voter registration and identity, and they forever tinker with boundaries that go in their favour. And what I worry about is that will we actually ever get to the position of winning with first past the post to bring in the reforms that we all want for electoral reform? And I suppose that's why I was vaguely in favour of something like these Progressive Alliance, at least for a first election, to get this thing underway, and then you could have a proper election with other people, with all the parties. I'm just concerned that we've got a mountain to climb to get through a first past the post, however good our intentions and popular, because this government is really trying, I mean, as John mentioned, like Trump has been doing in America, trying very hard to kind of permanently cement its position. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. So yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that on a sort of individual basis, many of our members, you know, that there are very different views. Many members are in favour of a Progressive Alliance. Many have reservations about it. So I guess, you know, what Sandy has outlined is that as an organisation, it's quite important for us not to be, you know, to really sort of focus on proportional representation rather than a Progressive Alliance, which is not something that everybody can unite around. But no, thank you very much for that contribution. And of course, you know, I hope that I'm sure we all hope that we can win under PR, because sorry, under first past the post, because we've absolutely got to. Right, next contribution from Saxon Spence. Saxon, you will have to, oh, okay, you've unmuted, thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm a new member, but I've been involved in organising in Devon for many years. And quite honestly, if you start supporting the Progressive Alliance, I will certainly leave and I will lose my enthusiasm for electoral reform, because all those policies do is destroy the Labour Party. If we're a national party, we should be prepared to allow everyone to have the opportunity to vote Labour. But I totally agree with Ben on you target where you want to win. You don't target where you think you haven't, somebody else has got a chance. And the electorate are really very bright. They know who to vote for if they don't want a Tory. But I do hope you will avoid getting involved with this, because it's been so destructive to us in Devon. And for the last 2 county elections, we put a Labour candidate up in every seat, and that has done wonders. And we're beginning now to get Labour councillors onto district councils. So we've got to remember we are a Labour party and we want Labour to win. So I totally agree with Sandy. It's a dangerous area to get involved with.
Thank you very much for that. So now I think that probably not everybody who's here was here right at the beginning of the meeting when Sandy announced that we did have to rejig the agenda slightly because the 2 MPs were going to have to leave a little bit early. So we took shorter contributions for the MPs. We had a sort of longer discussion now, and the plan was to finish this part of the meeting a bit early and to start the next session on the AGM business later. Now I'm seeing that there's one more hand, so James, I will bring you in, but after that I will close this part of the meeting. We'll have a short break and we will begin the business of the AGM at 11:30 or shortly afterwards. James, sorry again, no last name, please introduce yourself.
Hi, it's James Doran from Darlington CLP. After the conference, I was thinking about, you know, what could be done next, and one thought I had was that we have, you know, Labour councillors who are enthusiastic about electoral reform. Maybe they could